Welcome back on my first step ever. Another episode and another interesting story to learn from, and more than to learn from, to understand that what it really takes, what struggles it really there are that you need to face to go to that particular goal that you have been really eyeing on. And there's a lot of learnings on the way. But today, to share their learning, we have an amazing personality who is completely into the sports world. So please join me in welcoming Kevin Pickard all the way from... Kevin, can you please jump in and say hi to our viewers?
I certainly can. So I'm joining you today from the other side of the world, it would appear. But doing very well, very excited to be here and looking forward to, I guess, exploring some different topics.
Thank you so much, Kevin. It is really exciting to have someone from the sports fraternity because for sure I've had few guest speakers who are from marketing background, who are from management background, consultants. But I think people coming from sports background really have some certain skills and experiences in their life that is not just their own, but of the people they coach, they teach, or they also learn from. So I think it's going to be a great episode where we're going to listen to a lot of stories. Before that, let me introduce you to all my listeners and to all the viewers to our guest speaker today. Kevin is an innovation director, the Rogue Monkey podcaster, and performance consultant, a big advocate for coach-led athletic-centered sports development. And I think I'm very interested all things about sport. Because I always was very competitive and I wanted to be best at least in one team sport. But I think I learned the very hard way. So that's all good. Moving forward, he's very curious and constantly seeking new avenues of learning, always seeking, is there a better way? And I think that's an amazing mindset to go forward with because there's always lots of learning. So his drive stems from journey through sport that includes being an athlete, coach, manager, and talent developer. He believes that sport has the power to change lives and started his podcast to share the journey. And I'm so honored that today he's on our podcast to share his journey here as well. So Kevin, before we move into other stuff about your sports journey, about your mentoring and coaching journey, I would like to understand what kind of a person were you when you were in your teenage time? What was your mindset? And exactly how were you?
That's a great question to get us started. And I think if I think back to my teenage years, I was very focused on doing the sport and perhaps not as focused on all the other parts that make up sport. I wasn't that interested, I guess. And I think for me, it was the same thing that everyone goes through of growing up and actually realizing that there's more to life than just doing things for yourself. So kind of went through the back end of, I guess, my teenage years, and I transitioned into a job in a school. And that was a really interesting experience to start to, I guess, see a more professional side to the world and not just participating in sport that I did for many years. So I think, through my teenage years, it was, I guess, an ignorance to the complexity of the working world and very, I guess, selfish and self-centered on making sure that it was just me and my sport. And I think that kind of changed in my late teens, early 20s, and then kind of embarked on quite an interesting journey to where I am now.
Wow. So that was pretty honest about yourself, which is great. So as you mentioned that you were a very different person back then, what do you think you can contribute to your surroundings, or what sort of experiences shape you then? And how did you start thinking from the other's perspective?
Again, another great question. And I think it's something that takes place over time. I wouldn't have said it was one single thing. But I certainly got to a point where I realized that actually there's a long game at play, if you like. If you want to get somewhere in 2, 3, 4, 5 years' time, it's a slow, gradual process to get there. And I think that was a complete shift of mindset because, we're in a culture today where you can have everything immediately. I click a button on Amazon and tomorrow the package is dropping through my door, whereas actually in sport, it doesn't work like that. And I kind of transferred those lessons from sport and goal setting into business and my wider life, where actually, you know, if you've got a goal of something that's 2, 3, 4, 5 years away, it's lots of little steps and a process to get there. It includes lots of challenges and ups and downs and all those sorts of things. And I think being comfortable with that, being comfortable with failure and actually learning from it and moving forwards, I think is something that's kind of allowed me to get to where I am now. And certainly something that's allowed me to be a lot more comfortable with where I am now. Whereas I did feel like for many years, it was always chasing and chasing and chasing. Whereas actually now learning to enjoy that journey, because it's part of what we're all on. We're on a journey.
I really love when you just said that initially you used to just chase your goals, but now you also enjoy the part of your journey. And I think that having that sort of a mindset is a great achievement, because every now and then you have a goal set in your life for maybe the next 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, or even for maybe the end of the week. And often we do not actually notice what's going on in the process, or how we are being shaped up, or what has been good or a bad experience, because we are just thinking of how should we reach the end point. So I think that's an amazing learning that you have had, and I like us to discuss this even further in more depth, so that even our listeners who are youth across the globe can understand that how they can have this particular mindset and achieve what they want, but enjoy the journey as well. So as we go forward, Kevin, because my first step ever, what I thought was that once we take the first step in any profession that we are in, or even in personal decisions, personal life, we go through a lot of struggles, and the first step is the most difficult step ever. And because we don't share with a lot of people, and because we don't share the struggles, so people generally think that this must have been easy for the person, or that's all good. We always know the success story. So we have an opportunity to know your story of my first step ever. So what I'm really trying to understand from you is, when you thought that you wanted to be in a particular sport, what was your particular favorite sport, and the first thing that you ever thought when you had the feeling, what was the first thing that came in your mind when you played your first sport ever, if you remember?
I think it's ironic, because it was actually getting to a point where I did sport a lot when I was a child and a teenager. And the whole point of sport is that you're on a journey. You're constantly seeking to improve. You're enjoying, making new friends, traveling places, all of those sorts of things. And yet it probably took me maybe 10 years after that to realize that. So I grew up in the world of swimming, but I was fortunate enough to grow up by the coast, and therefore the beach sports started to weave their way into my life. So skimboarding, bodyboarding, surfing, and it kind of developed from there. And I kind of pursue those two things today, but in very different lights. So when I was younger, it was much more competitive swimming and surfing for fun. And now swimming is my job. I work in the world of swimming, but actually my hobby of surfing, I still do. And I just immerse myself in it and enjoy it. So I think I've got a bit more of a balance now, but I do think that's a process you have to go through, and something that, I've discovered through my podcast is actually people don't often realize the life lessons until after. It's quite a strong mindset to get into, to actually acknowledge that you're in a tough place and go, this is good for me. And yet, ironically, most people have been familiar with that. They've just not thought about it in their lives. So you go to the gym and you say, I want to lose some weight, or I want to get stronger, or I want to get fitter, or whatever it is. You accept that it's going to take 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks of going to the gym regularly and going on a process to get there, and it's going to be uncomfortable. And yet when we apply that in life and go, it's too hard, I can't do it. I love, off the back of your podcast, this notion of just taking the first step. That's the hardest bit, because your perceptions over what can go wrong and how hard it's going to be are always worse than what it is. And once you've taken that first step, actually everything after that is like a snowball. It just builds momentum. And even through the hardships, you get there. So I think that's a kind of a really interesting topic to kind of explore, is actually this notion of that perceived fear of failure and the perceived hardship of actually taking that first step, because once you've done it, it gets so much easier.
Really, really, I think what I would like to pinpoint and highlight over here is what you've just spoken about: failure, the perceived fears and failures. So Kevin, what was that one particular moment in your life I'm not sure. I mean, not everyone has a defining moment or, the life changing moment. But what was that moment in your life when you had the worst failure or you faced one of the most difficult situations when you were just, in your early career days? And if you're comfortable sharing that with us, and how did you overcome that?
So I can pinpoint one of my sporting career relatively early on. So I think I was 15, went to a national competition, was ranked, if you like, to make the top 8, top 10. And it went wrong and turned around and drove home. And it was about an 8-hour journey and an overnight stay to get there, and then a very long 8-hour journey and a drive to get back. And the race was done and dusted in under 30 seconds. So it's a very condensed moment where actually lots of things that could have gone wrong did go wrong. But actually, at the time, certainly didn't deal with it well. I wouldn't have said I overcome it in any way, shape or form for a while. I lost motivation, lost interest, like drifted away, did the typical teenage thing of refusing to acknowledge responsibility and all those sorts of things. Whereas I still compete for fun now. And when I go to an event and it doesn't go well, I rationalize it and go, well, you haven't done enough training or whatever it is, and just acknowledge it and go, well, you're still here having fun, and move on from it. So, and I think that's, again, a life journey that, you probably couldn't have told me that at 15 and I would have listened, because that's what teenage boys are like. So I think part of the journey of failure and exploring what failures mean to you, I think, is learning from them, and that takes time. I think when you're young, you think you know everything, and actually the older you get, the less you learn the less you know. And that's something that has been ironic, because the older I've got, the more I've sought out and tried to find more information about anything, work, professional life, health, doesn't matter, whatever it is, there's always that thirst for more information. Whereas when you're young, you just think, no, I've got everything I need, I'm fine, off I go. So yeah, this relationship with failure is certainly something that evolves. It's an ongoing thing. But from my early experiences of it were quite poor.
Now, that's really interesting when you say that if someone goes up to a teenager and tells them this is what it might lead to, so maybe reassess your actions, no one is going to listen at that point in time, because we have our own idea of the world. And I think you're bang on when you said that. But having said that, as you said, that when you have relationship with your failures, and the more that you have failures, the more you get comfortable with the idea of it. And that only comes when you experiment a lot. So Kevin, moving forward, I suppose you've experimented a bit with the kind of sports that you have been. When did the idea of being a coach from being a sportsman, I mean, you are a sportsman altogether, but being a player and then being a coach, when did that first come into your mind?
I think there comes a realization in everyone's sporting journey, if you like, of where I wouldn't say necessarily limits are, but where your trajectory is heading. And I remember in 2011, I got offered the chance to be a training partner for one of the Olympic team running up to the London Olympics. And
wow, congratulations.
It was so much fun, a great experience. And for 9 months, trained pretty much full time. And actually, that was a really interesting journey, because you saw the commitment and the investment and everything that comes with being an Olympic level athlete, and then watch that athlete go to the Olympics, come fourth, miss a medal by 0.7 of a second. And it suddenly made me realize the level of intricacies that sit behind an athlete's journey. And at that point, it was kind of like, well, I'm never going to be good enough as myself as an athlete to get at that level, but actually there are other ways you can support people getting to that level. And I think that was where this kind of notion of coaching started. The year after that, I finished off a coaching based degree, and then went into full-time coaching then, and kind of haven't really stopped. It's evolved and changed in terms of my roles. And I think like now I'm in the process of launching a business coaching platform, because I feel like so many lessons from the sports world are transferring over into the life world, working world and everything else. And I think too often sport can feel like it's over here, and then the rest of life and business sits over here. Whereas actually, if you look at the lessons of patience, learning from failures, being open-minded, being goal and process orientated, all of those sorts of things, they transfer perfectly. So yeah, it's a journey that I've gone on in sports coaching for the last nearly 20 years. And wow. Now moving into the business coaching space. So it's certainly an area I'm interested in.
That's incredible. And I really like the sound of your journey, how it has been. And I think you've taken one step by one step, and you have built this kind of confidence and experience that you have. Another thing I just like to explore, Kevin, from your perspective or your experience is, once you have tasted success, how has your relationship been with success, and did that ever sort of sway you from your goals going forward, that really made you strong every time going forward?
That's another really good question. And I think the things that jump out to me with success is that it's about how high you choose to let it push you. So, my most enjoyable sporting memories have usually been watching other people do sport. If I think of my standout sporting memories over the last maybe 30 years, my earliest ones are of, watching, say, the England football team trying and failing at football and the latter stages.
Wow.
Or 2003 we won the Rugby World Cup, and I acutely remember watching that when I was going through, I think at the time, my A levels, and that really kind of hooked, I guess, an interest in not just sport but the elite sport space, and then all the intricacies of coaches and physiologists and psychology and all of those sorts of things that came with that. And then, since then, you had the Beijing Olympics, where the Team GB, I guess, medal snowball started. 2012 it lifted again. 2016 it lifted again. And I know the pandemic was quite an unusual Olympics, but it kind of solidified my interest in sport. And I think when it comes to success, it's defining what success means to you. And I think too often, especially in the modern day, that can be quite superficial. Certain size house, certain type of car, certain amount of money in the bank, whatever it is. But actually, and I'm sure you've experienced it when you're interviewing people, you talk to people that perhaps have what we deem on the outside to be successful backgrounds, but actually their metrics for success are completely different. And I think that's what I often say to people when they say, oh, I wish I was successful, or whatever it was in whatever field, sport, business, or life. And they say, well, what do you actually define as success? Because if it's something superficial that doesn't move you to your core, then actually when you get it, it'll feel like quite a hollow victory. And that's where now, I try and prioritize my time around experiences, time with friends and family, a business that connects with people and actually impacts people, as opposed to, how many likes can this post get, or, all of those sorts of things. So I think it's quite a strange world that we're in now, in the sense of it's easy to get success if you have the wrong metrics. But actually, if you want long-term sustained success that really means something to you, you need to define that and be crystal clear on what it actually is going to mean to you personally.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very great way to look at success. And I think it's a very great way to look at anything in your personal life. I mean, right now we are addressing this podcast to the youth, to the students, and to youngsters and people who are early in their career. And I think it is very important for us to take away one thing from what Kevin has just mentioned, that whatever your goal is, you need to have your standards, you need to have your own perspective out there and your own rule written, that what it really means to you, whether it's success, whether it's happiness, or whatever it is. So having that your own standard and not society's standard can really help you feel good about things. And I think that does come with practice as well. Speaking of success, Kevin, I really am interested to know, from your 20 years of worth of amazing career, what has been your proudest moment till date, if you can pick one?
It's a really strange one, I guess, because the more you get immersed on the journey, if you like, you take the little wins. And I think too often people look for the big single thing. I remember listening to an interview with Johnny Wilkinson talking about when he kicks that winning goal in the 2003 Rugby World Cup. If that was his defining moment, he would spend the rest of his life looking back up the hill at that moment, and nothing would ever be as good as that. Whereas actually, I try and get to a point now where every week or every month I have like mini successes, if you like. And I think, there's plenty. I guess there's plenty of moments from, my career, I'm sure, like everyone else's, both sporting and my professional journey, where actually you're like, oh, that was pretty cool. I remember doing this. I remember doing that. I ran my first marathon 2-3 weeks ago, and, that was awesome. It was a really incredible experience, really, really powerful experience. But equally, that doesn't mean I'm going to sit and just spend the next, year looking back and going, that was great, and everything else will be fine because of that. I kind of take every week, I have my old school diary, and I will be taking like a few points every day of, right, let's get this ticked off. Let's have a success there. Let's have a win here. And I think it's obviously, again, it's different for everybody, but people say, what's the mark of a successful coach? And I say to them, when they get a letter from their athlete in 10 years' time inviting them to their wedding, that's when you've had an impact on someone's life. So I think, not saying I'm looking for lots of wedding invites, but I think it's redefining that metric. And I think too often we put that on very clinical things that perhaps are out of people's control. Whereas when you're actually talking about going on a journey and what does success mean, it means enjoying yourself, being happy, healthy, having a good time along the way, because in 50 years' time, they're the bits you'll remember. They're the photos you'll have up on the wall. And that's kind of, I hope, what's going to like pedal, I guess, the business aspects of the coaching I'm looking to do, because ultimately everyone is on a journey. And if you turn around to somebody and said in their business, I want to make £500,000 profit this year, and then you make it, suddenly the clouds don't part and rainbows don't shine down on you and everything's suddenly waved a magic wand and solved in your life. It's an arbitrary statistic. Whereas actually, if you said, I want to have a profitable company, but it has happy staff, I have a good work-life balance, I feel fit and healthy, my mental health's in a good place, all of those sorts of things, actually that's a much more impactful goal that at the end of it, you're going to feel much more fulfilled with it. So yeah, I think from my own journey, there's so many little things, but I try and now get to the point where it's almost like tiny little goals every week, because actually that makes you feel much more satisfied than I think one thing every 10 years that's like your crown jewel, if you like.
I'm so glad that you did bring this up, and I could completely identify and relate to your thought process over here. And if I can maybe summarize or maybe take one takeaway from your perspective on having a proud moment, or what is the success, is having an impact on people that you are helping or working for, and creating some sort of positive influence or helping people achieve their dreams, as you are doing through your coaching business that you're into, sports right now. You're not just helping people be better at what they want to, but also I think leaving a legacy behind. I'm for sure, and I do hope that you do get a lot of wedding invites for sure, and that's definitely a mark of how well they have taken you and welcomed you in their life. So thank you so much, Kevin, from your journey from being a teenager to being a 15-year-old boy who knows everything about the world, and from learning from your own mistakes, and then realizing that you would like to step into the coaching industry and sharing such great wisdom with us. One very important aspect that you have touched today is about the proudest moments, that you're only as good as your last action, is what I term as, or your last task, your last achievement. And I think that's a good enough motivation to keep doing something good each week, so that you upgrade yourself and improve very often. So thank you, Kevin. And I think the one last question that I really like to ask you is that, can you leave our listeners and viewers with top 3 learnings of your life so far, be it personal or professional?
Wow, what a big one to finish on. Okay, so there's a couple of things. The first thing, top of the list by a mile, is use of time. Understand how you use your time. If you listed out your 24 hours in a day and actually tallied up how you spent it, would you be happy with that? Is that a reflection on what you value and what's important to you? I think that's really important. I think connections in terms of friends and family and time with those is an integral part of the journey, because there's no point in, I remember watching an interview of Steve Jobs talking about at the end, before he sadly passed away, he's like, yeah, I've got the mansion and I've got, 10 billion quid in the bank, but I'm sitting here by myself. And I think that's something. So connection is a huge thing for me. And I think learning to enjoy the journey, because it doesn't matter how good you are, how successful you are, there will be downs, and you can get carried away if you have too many highs. But I do think if you actually learn to enjoy the process every day, embrace the failures, absorb and take in the successes, but don't get carried away by them, life is much more satisfying that way, because at the end of the day, we've all got the same amount of time, I guess, some people have more, some people have less, but every single day. And I think it's making sure that when you put your head on the pillow each night, you feel like you've made good on the hours that you've been given that day. And if you can honestly put your head down every night and go, if I had that time again, I wouldn't change anything, then you're in a really good place.
Absolutely. And I always request my guest speakers to finish the episode on a very, very good and very positive note. That is, what has been their favorite quote or favorite saying that they would like to share with our listeners?
My one by a country mile is, we only get one go round, but if we do it right, once is enough.
Awesome. Awesome. That is such a great quote to end this episode on. Thank you, Kevin, for being on My First Step Ever. I had an amazing time chatting with you and asking you some really probing questions. But I think you have been so genuine and honest and really left us with some very interesting lessons to reflect on. And yes, I think once we have more, we experiment more, we have experience more, we learn from them. But it is also good to learn from experience of our guest speakers because they have been there, done that, and we can definitely take something from their journey. So thank you, Kevin.
No, thank you, Ashani. It's been a real pleasure. Really, really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Okay, so thanks, Kevin, for being on the podcast and this episode. Just before we say bye, I just wanted to check if I can ask you two more quick questions, and that generally goes like a promotional thing that I can tag you on also. Awesome. So, Kevin, my first question is, what has been your greatest regret and how did you turn that around?
I think probably the amount of time in my earlier years that I wasted. And although I can't go back in time, I can certainly make use of the time going forward. So I'm much more mindful of how I spend my time nowadays. And I certainly don't think I waste as much because it's the most precious thing we have. And it doesn't matter how much money you've got, you can't buy a second of it.
Wow, that was so deep. That was so deep and so true. Thank you so much. And the last and the easiest, how was your experience being on My First Step Ever?
It was absolutely awesome. Some fantastic questions, some really dynamic thinking, and really, really enjoyed it.
Thank you again. And yeah, that's about it. So I'll just stop the recording now.